Hello, beautiful people. You are listening to the Communal Table podcast, part of Food and Wine Pro. I'm your host, Kat Kinsman, and my guest today is the wonderful Julia Sullivan of Henrietta Red in Nashville. When I found out that she was going to be in town cooking a dinner at Benno, I really knew that I wanted to have her in because I've been hearing about her for a pretty long time from my colleagues who made her a Best New Chef a few years ago. And she is the captain of Food and Wine's team for Chef's Cycle. And I am endlessly impressed by people who can do something like that for such a great cause. So thank you for coming on here today, Julia.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So talk to me about why you are in New York City today.
So I am here cooking a dinner as part of a legacy series at Jonathan Benno's restaurant, Benno, on East 27th Street. He was my chef at Per Se. He was the chef de cuisine there from when they opened until about 2014 when he moved to Lincoln, and now he has opened his own restaurant as part of the Evelyn Hotel. So he's doing a legacy series. There are 4 of us who are going to be here this year, including Eduardo Jordan from June Baby in Seattle, Matt Orlando from Amas in Denmark.
Incredible.
Yeah, and then James and Sandia from Bubble Dogs in London.
Oh my God, I just went to Bubble Dogs for the first time, and it was the most exciting dining experience that I'd had in ages. That is so exciting.
Yeah, and they just had a baby, I think, today.
I saw on Instagram.
Yeah.
That's, oh my gosh. Okay, so you just mentioned all these people, including yourself, for whom I have tremendous esteem. So let's talk about your road to Per Se at this point, and then we'll get on to what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Nashville and then went to college at Tulane University in New Orleans. Which is sort of, yeah.
Is that distracting?
It is distracting, and I think there's a group of people who certainly cannot handle it, really. Right. But most of us, we were able to sort of work hard and play hard and take advantage of the city and the festivals and Mardi Gras. And that's sort of where I became interested in the business, because Nashville at the time in 2001, there really actually wasn't that much going on. And then you go to New Orleans, where these restaurants have been open for more than 100 years, mm-hmm. and there's these dynasties like the Brennans, and there's a culture and sort of lore that goes along with it that was just very romantic.
They make the joke that if you pass by people on the street, they're either talking about where they just had lunch or where they're going for dinner.
Yeah, just pretty much me all the time.
Right.
Yeah. So I studied management and finance with the interest in the restaurant business. I sort of had decided that's where I wanted to go. So I followed that up with an associate's at the CIA, and then went from there to Blue Hill at Stone Barns.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that was my first big time restaurant experience.
Okay, and let's talk for a second. If I'm sure most people listening to this, if you're listening to this, you're probably familiar with Stone Barns, right. But just in case, can you explain what that is and why it's so significant?
Yeah, absolutely. So Stone Barns had, I think at that time, it had been open about 2 years also. It opened the same year as Per Se. It was Dan Barber's second restaurant in the Hudson Valley, an 84-acre organic farm that was really meant to be his next chapter, but primarily to be a center for food and agriculture with Stone Barns, where they could educate about sustainable agriculture, and they really have done quite a lot to push heritage breeds. And now at this point, they just launched a seed company where they're coming up with
Row 7
new breeds of vegetables that are being bred for culinary characteristics specifically. So really, really innovative, not just from a culinary standpoint, but from an agricultural standpoint. And so as a young cook was just a pretty fantastic place to be. So from there, ended up in the city at Per Se, and I was there for 2 years. And just like you said before, I think I was there at a very special time, 2007 to 2009, was like a cross section of all these people who are now just running some of the best restaurants in the world. So I feel, again, I was 24 years old, very impressionable. I was working with like David Breeden from the French Laundry on one side of me and then Matt Orlando on the other side. And I was like way above my head. But it was, it was amazing.
The fact that you were working there in the first place, though, speaks to what you must have already shown there, because it's not like they hire slouches there.
Right. Well, you know what? I met JB at Chef Benno at the CIA. He was doing a demo on sous vide cooking. It was not like they were starting the development for Chef Keller's sous vide cookbook. Mm-hmm. So he was there doing a demo, and I was a student volunteer, and we just like had a good rapport. And then I saw him again when I was still a student and asked him about coming into Trail, and then ended up there. And actually, probably one of my only professional regrets was not staying at Stone Barns longer, but also I wouldn't change anything about going to Per Se at that time, especially because he specifically has been such an incredible mentor and help to me in my career. So it was really at the right place at the right time.
What did you learn about yourself through this? Because I'm thinking, I read the memoir written by the server who worked at Per Se, and it's an astonishing chronicle of the training that people go through there. I'm totally blanking on her name because I suck. Service included by Phoebe Damrosch.
Good
okay,
job.
there it is.
Good
Thank
job.
you. It's a wonderful book, but talking about the sort of calibration of service that happens there, talking about taking movement training, talking about, dealing with guests in a particular way. Every single movement seems prescribed, scripted. I mean, there's a flow to it, but it seems like there's such a precision to it. Can you talk about going into something like that? How does that affect your psyche?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the kitchen is not that different from the dining room in that restaurant. Like everything is very, very choreographed. And I think
choreographed, that's a great word.
Yes. Yeah. And I think on a great night, especially with Chef Benno at the Pass, it felt like a really great football game. Somebody's like calling orders and everything's in sync and the timing is correct. And then on really hard nights, it felt really, really awful.
Oh God.
And you hated to be like responsible for any part of that. I think it was really, not that many kitchens like that exist. And I think when you're in it, you sort of think that everyone else is the outlier, and then you get out of it and you realize, no, actually, that was the outlier. It can be very intense.
Yeah. What's the emotional tenor of that? Like I'm thinking like there are kitchens that you see where it's just head down, "We chef."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't an aggressive place, but it was definitely a very hyper-focused place. I mean, we didn't talk, we didn't play music, we did yell back. I have, trouble getting my cooks to call back to me now, and there it's just like this automatic. It can be very intense because everything is about sense of urgency, no movement wasted, and so and you're changing a 9-course tasting menu every day. So so you start your day basically with nothing, and then you have 5 hours to prep it all perfectly, beautifully from scratch, and then be in service for 6 hours. So it's a lot.
How do you take care of yourself at that point? How did you take care of your physical and mental self?
Well, I think so. I have always been, an athlete. In high school, I ran track and field and cross country and just always stayed in shape. So I was very good about exercising, which, I think for me, it was like my alone time, sort of its own meditation, like, really helped me stay focused and burn off nervous energy. So I think that was a very good habit. The things that are challenging are that there just isn't a lot of time for self-care. There's not a lot of time for sleep or recovery. So you end up spending a lot of your 2 days off sleeping. So there's not a ton of room for family or or really anything outside of it. And I think there's really something to be said for that to a degree in your formative years of having that kind of discipline and commitment to something. And I think it's probably a little bit different now,
I think the last few years there's been a really palpable change in restaurants and restaurant culture. And frankly, like a lot of people getting sober, a lot of people taking up, group exercise challenges. Right. And I think a lot of people, I hear from a lot of restaurateurs that they are having a hard time hiring people because people see now, because people are speaking out about it, the conditions in a kitchen, thinking like, screw that, I don't want to do that to my life, to my body, to my chance of having a family, to having meaningful relationships with people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you certainly have to consider priorities. And I think one thing that I grapple with a little bit now as a restaurant owner is that the amount of work that it takes to run a 100-seat restaurant, there's all these positive changes in the industry, and, we want to pay people more and give people more time off, but the actual amount of work that it takes to run the restaurant hasn't changed. And so that's a difficult thing with an owner, or for an owner, I think, to reconcile, because if you take a lot of that weight off of your hourly staff, you tend to place a lot of that on yourself, on your managers.
Yes.
And it's I still don't think we've quite figured out. Like, someone needs to shift the paradigm, but there's a reason it's been the same for as long as it has, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spent a lot of time talking to chefs from all over the world, and trying to figure out the small things that they have done to better work-life balance, to have a better physical self in the kitchen, to encourage talk around mental health. And I see it being done piecemeal in some really smart and thoughtful kind of ways. Some of the restaurants in Copenhagen, they'll decide like, we're just going to be open for fewer days.
Yes.
And, or or they pass the cost of things along to consumers along with pretty open language about where to do it. Or, they offer, sort of after work running or something like that. But I don't know if anybody's cracked the case quite yet. And that's the struggle. I keep coming back to use the word choreography that you saw me like seize on like that. I had another friend, Kate Barney, who she's really a beautiful, wonderful human being, who was working at Stone Barns when I had gone for a fairly significant dinner. It was actually the 10-year anniversary of my first date with my husband, but my husband got ordained and married a couple of friends of ours in the grain silo there, which was really, really special. And she was part of the choreography of the whole night. But it was funny, I was watching them round the dining room, and I sort of got to know their little, like, almost baseball signals to each other. And you become part of such an entity. How do you detach self from that when you're used to being part of, whether a front of house team, in the kitchen? There is this unity of movement. When we walked through the kitchen from this grain silo where there were just the four of us, and they knew that, our friends had gotten married, everybody stopped for a moment and banged on pots and pans, and it was the most beautiful thing in the world, that it felt like an entity. How do you take yourself from being, a kitchen that's like that and be a person separate from like that? When you go home, how do you be a person?
I think it's tough. I'm trying to, especially at that age, I think it's tough. And I think, when you are an ambitious, when you're trying to learn everything you can in that time and space and push yourself to grow, I think it can be difficult. I think young people now, at least that I'm seeing in Nashville, have better boundaries about it. But yeah, I do think it is. I think making the time, like I said, on your days off to stay connected to friends and family is really important, because if you're constantly surrounded by people from the restaurant and industry people, it is easy to sort of lose yourself a little bit. Being back in Nashville has been great for me because, I'm in my 30s and I have family there and nieces and nephews and also aging parents. And it's hard for me as an owner, I think, to step away and say, you know what, somebody needs me today and I'm going to go do that. But I'm getting better at it.
Takes
2 years in.
It's so really hard. I see my husband as a boss at work, and he before his current job had his own company, and put himself last all the time.
Yeah.
At like and I see him doing all of the jobs,
Right. And it's not, I don't think it's only hard for the reasons that are so obvious, but it's also hard because there's a little bit of an aftermath. Like whenever I say, you know what, I'm just going to take a day or I'm going to take this vacation, there's like, for me at least, like guilt associated with that. And that's kind of the hardest part is how hard I am on myself.
Oh man, I grew up Catholic school 12 years, and all of that, and it's a really hard thing. I think especially for people who go into restaurants, because there's a meticulousness of people who go into the kitchen, and I know that a lot of people are drawn to kitchen life because there's this precision to it, and there's this mental math that goes on all the time. Like when you go home, did I wrap that thing right?
Yeah.
Did I shut this? Did I do this thing? And it probably takes everything in your being not to drive back to the restaurant.
Right, exactly.
And shutting down that part that says let it burn. That's got to be such a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, it is. But I think too, building a really responsible, committed, trustworthy management team,
Yes,
and rewarding them so that you can step away, whether it's for a professional trip or for a personal reason. That is huge, huge, huge.
Let's talk about then, and we'll get to that. Let's talk about your road back to Nashville and to becoming an owner, because it's I know how hard it is to get financing for such a thing, and even more so for women.
Yeah.
I know it's got to be. Let's talk about how you made the decision to, first of all, go back to where you're from and to take this thing on, to open a restaurant. That is a masochistic thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I think what drives people to open restaurants is probably different for everyone, but my reason, I think, is more that I feel deeply entrepreneurial and wanting to work for myself and have a small business. And cooking just happened to be what I was good at and fell into and had experience with. And so the business side of it is sort of as interesting to me as the cooking side. And I often tell people if I was like purely about the cuisine, I might still be in New York, at the helm of someone else's restaurant. And I feel guilt about that sometimes that I'm not only about the cuisine, but I really do love being a restaurateur. So for me, the road back to Nashville was that I had wanted, sort of since I was a student at Tulane, had always wanted to open a restaurant. That was it. And at the time, in 2001, Margot McCormick opened Margot in East Nashville. She was just on the long list for James Beard for Outstanding Chef this year. Yeah, and she's been doing her thing in Nashville for 17 years, and she's a native as well. And so I always really looked to her as kind of the model for this like small, quaint space and a small business that was really making a big impression. And Nashville sort of grew slowly and surely from there and really didn't start to like pop off until like the last 5 to 10 years.
It's batty.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I sort of saw myself as a Margot and wanted to go back. And then right about the time that I started to seriously think about it and write a business plan was like, 2011, 2012, when like you started to see the city everywhere. It was getting great PR and there was like some interesting chefs starting to move down that way. So I made the decision. I said, so actually I took a job working for Haven's Kitchen on West 17th Street. So so I was the opening chef there, and luckily got into the project at a time when we were still in the architect's office, construction design. And so I saw like many pre-opening stages, and I think said, you know what, I can do this. I'm ready to do this. And so I moved back home and started putting plans together. A colleague of mine from Haven's Kitchen actually ended up moving with me to be my general manager. She's a sommelier there as well. Well, for me, with me. And so we were working on the business plan, sort of pounding the pavement. And in the meantime, we both took other jobs. She was serving at an Italian restaurant for one restaurant group in town, and I was an opening sous chef at a restaurant called Pinewood Social with the folks from Strategic Hospitality and Josh Habiger, who's now at Bastion. And that was a really tough opening. It was a 200-seat plus restaurant with a bowling alley, and at a time when the city was just starting to boom.
Yes.
And we
That's ambitious as heck.
Oh my gosh. But I don't even think they realized how ambitious. Like, I think they thought people would be hanging out and bowling and drinking cocktails, and all of a sudden we were doing 600 covers on a Saturday night and just getting crushed by bachelorette parties.
Oh, because it is a bachelorette destination.
It is.
True.
And so I think everyone involved, Josh and I and the other sous chefs, we were sort of, frankly, hadn't done that volume before, and it was tough. It was really tough. And meanwhile, I'd go home and I was up late every night sort of working on what was next for me and Allie, my partner. And the fundraising was really hard. It was really, really hard. We emailed, spoke to everyone we knew, asked who they could introduce us to. We got a few yeses, mostly from close friends and family. We got a few sort of dangling carrots from some old chefs and colleagues, and mostly we got a lot of maybes, which I learned is like the worst possible thing to get.
Because you're just there on tenterhooks.
Yeah. So you want like the biggest lesson I learned is like get people to say no, because you don't want them to like be hanging on, to leave you.
It's so stressful.
It's really stressful because you don't really ever know when to close the door. You're like, should I email them? Should I not? Some of them are friends or friends, parents of friends or colleagues, and it just gets very awkward at some point. So yes or no, but eventually we hit a wall, and we went to Ben Goldberg, who is the owner of Pinewood and was my friend in high school, and him and his brother. Yeah, so him and his brother are the owners of Strategic Hospitality. I had been in school with one of them since first grade, and I went to his older brother, Ben, and I said, I've really hit a wall. I'm not going to pitch you on this. I don't want to be part of a restaurant group, but like, can you introduce me to 10 people? Could you give me some advice? And he said, let me give some thought. And it ended up coming back 6 or 8 weeks later and saying, we actually have a great space that we can see this working out there. What if we did this together? And there was a lot of hesitation. It wasn't like rejoice, moment of rejoice. Yeah. There was a lot of hesitation on my part because I'd always envisioned myself doing it
in the
with
Margo.
investors on my own sort of. And so there was a lot of back and forth, and it was still a long drawn out process. But at the end of the day, Allie and I really fought for what we believed in and held on to what we thought was important, and we opened in February of 2017, and it's been like an overwhelmingly positive experience.
And you were a Food and Wine Best New Chef.
Food and Wine Best New Chef just last year.
That's
yeah.
And we are, at the time we're recording this, a week from tomorrow, the 2019 class will be revealed.
Really, that soon?
This soon.
Wow,
It's
that's so exciting.
Oh, it's such a special group of people, and we are. We're a thing that we have thought about, and that I will ask you now is, what can we ask of past Best New Chefs? What did they learn along the way? What did they pick up from the sudden scrutiny of that? Because it really is. It's all of a sudden like standing in the floodlight.
Yes, it is. I think, it was a pretty overall positive experience. I mean, I really can't say enough about the exposure it gives you, also the connections just with your classmates, and it's been really, really special to get to know this group of 10 chefs from around the country.
And you were the 30th group, I believe?
Yeah, 30th anniversary, which was amazing. And you're looking back at people like Thomas Keller and Danielle, I think were the first year.
Yeah, they were super early on.
Yeah, so it's a very special thing to be a part of. I think just sort of making sure that the home fire is burning. The restaurant has to be the first priority. You're going to get asked to do a million things, and I think really prioritizing the stuff that's important to you, like for instance, if your mentor Jonathan Beno calls you and wants you to come to New York, say yes.
Yeah.
Right. But then if there's something that is, just not that near and dear to your heart, it's okay to say no, because there's going to be more.
That is such a huge lesson to learn, whether you're a chef or whether
anybody.
Yeah, it's such a hard thing. We actually do have a couple of PR people coming in to talk to the chefs about what is worth your time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
People ask, and I don't know if the public knows this necessarily, chefs are asked constantly for things, and it's so much of it is great. It's for charity, it's for this event, that event, can you do this, can you do this? And how many requests a day do you get for things like that?
I mean, the restaurant definitely gets at least 2 or 3 a day, just from, hey, we're from this organization, as small as, can you donate a gift card, to, can you do this dinner in another state? And of course, there's only so many days in the year, so a lot of it you just have to say no to outright because it's a conflict or whatever. But you have to keep a lot of things in mind, like your personal health, the things that are important to you, but also your team and how you're going to lead. And it doesn't really work if you're gone every weekend, and so I think you have to really prioritize.
I definitely get that, because it seems like, you have this moment and you think, I have to make the most of this and say yes to absolutely everything. And then you end up costing yourself your physical and emotional and mental
life. Yeah.
It's really tough to do that. So you went into business with people who you already knew and liked. That's something that we're actually going to be talking with the best new chefs about too, like who to go into business with and how you maintain that. And we're like bringing in Jonathan and Amelia Sawyer to talk about, and he was the best new chef some years back, how you maintain a marriage while you do that, how you maintain any of these things. I see chefs trying to date or go to family events or just see their friends every once in a while, and it's how do you maintain any kind of relationship, whether it's somebody inside the restaurant bubble or outside of it?
It's very tough. I mean, from the family standpoint, I am very lucky. My family is so supportive, and they sort of understand that if I'm not at home, I'm pretty much at the restaurant, and so they come to me. They come in for happy hour. They bring their friends in, and it's great.
It's lovely.
It's a really nice reason to be home. I mean, and I'll just, on that note, Nashville, Nashville is so supportive. There's not a night that goes by that we don't look out into the dining room and see somebody we know, whether it's like a high school principal, a friend, a teacher, an old chef, and that is really, really special. And it really makes you feel like people are showing up and supporting you, which we love. My parents are great about, very supportive siblings. So that helps, but I do try and get away because, aging parents, siblings with children, you just really have to, it's tough. You have to sort of start to make that a priority. Personal life, I'm terrible at. I'll just be honest.
That's all. I mean,
I'm terrible
you know
at.
what? I think that's important to say. That's important to talk about, because it's a thing that happens with front of house, back of house. Like, you get out at crazy ass hours, and it's there aren't a lot of people who can understand that. Like, that restaurant comes first for you as an owner. It's
and not for your own personal gains, but for like the livelihood of the 50 people working for you too. I wish I had better advice about it. I've dated people in the industry, not in the industry, and I think there's challenges to both. But I think I'm trying to make more space for it.
I mean, most people I know who have a partner in they're both in the industry, and that's because it's the other person who gets it. But I also know a few successful couples who they don't, and they just sort of had to make rules for their relationship. About how do we do this? I'm going to come home and I'm going to wake you up. I'm going to whatever it happens to be. But I think it's important to say this stuff out loud so people know what they're getting into, and there's no shame in it.
Absolutely. I think, Josh said something which I think is important. He got married around the time that Bastion opened, and he said, when I'm not at the restaurant, Laura knows the restaurant is my priority, and when I'm not at the restaurant, she is number one, and that's it. Like, I make the time, and I think that's what I'm learning in a new relationship is it's more about quality, not quantity necessarily.
Oh, absolutely, making the most of that time. And,
Right.
I know there seems to be a lot of chefs who have animals too,
Mm-hmm.
and those. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but about like people who have made some way to have the animal at the restaurant, like either like it's a little doghouse out back or something, because it seems to be really good emotional care for the team to be able to like walk out and pet a puppy. It just occurred to me, I was in Austin recently at a restaurant I won't name because one of the cooks did this. He knew the couple of people I was with, and he walked out with a bag and said, "Want to pet a dirty puppy?" I'm like, hell yeah, I want to pet your dirty puppy. But it was such a nice thing, I think, for morale for the people who were working there too.
Yeah, our kitchen is big on dogs. We don't have any at the restaurant, but most of us have one. And I go home during family meal to walk my dog.
Aww.
And it is a big, it's not convenient, but it is a big source of comfort for me. So I'm not getting rid of it anytime soon.
Tell me about your dog.
He's a mutt. He's a little terrier, some sort of terrier. He's not very well behaved. He's fiercely loyal, and I love him. But
what's his name?
His name is Wrigley.
Oh, Wrigley.
And so this is actually, I think, kind of an important thing to say out loud too, is I actually share him with an ex, and we are very good about keeping a schedule, and people think it's like crazy, but if you're a single person with a busy work schedule, it's so nice to have another person who actually takes responsibility, and they can watch it when you're out of town, et cetera, et cetera. So it actually works really well.
I think that's lovely.
Yeah, it's nice.
I think that sounds like a very mature, responsible adult thing to do.
Yeah. Totally.
Kelly Fields, we recorded with her, and again, I never know what order these are airing in, but talked about the effect of getting a dog on her mental health and saying that was the best possible thing that she could have done. And it I always think, like, as I am very open about the fact that I have anxiety and all these things. I tell myself that the single best use of my time is making my dogs feel safe and calm, and especially I have this little girl dog, Penelope. I have two of them, but she in particular like rolls over and gives me her belly, and I think like I'm making her feel safe and secure, and it's just the most calming thing in the world, and I'm making her calm, and I feel good about it.
It's really nice too. It gets you out of your home, and I bet in a city like New York especially, but when going on walks every morning and every staff meal, getting to know your neighborhood and your neighbors in a way that you wouldn't otherwise, just having that 30 minutes in the morning where you can just be silent with the dog, or you can put on a meditation podcast and like reset yourself for the day. Like, I really think it's that thing, especially for a single person, that forces you to make a little time and space that's not just about you, not just about the restaurant. So for me, it's been great.
And then that sounds like a wonderful thing to do for yourself. And how do you communicate to your team that they should be taking care of themselves as well?
We make a point to...
And who's the we here?
I say we a lot when I'm talking about myself. and the restaurant, the royal we, but Allie and Allie, my partner, and I, we do make a point to, especially when there's, events in the industry that we feel like are significant, in the last couple of years with suicide or sexual harassment, et cetera, to stop and really acknowledge it and talk about it and remind people that we have their backs if they need it. I think for the most part, our staff actually feels really comfortable speaking to us, approaching us about personal problems. And we try very hard to be accessible. It's not always... It's not like there's daily reminders, but, we try to do small things like we do offer benefits.
That's not a small thing. That's a huge thing.
Yeah, we may offer a staff meal every day, and we try to make sure it's always balanced and healthy. Another sort of takeaway from fine dining. But we I think just acknowledging that these things happen, and we're here, and if you're noticing someone struggling physically or emotionally, to just pull them aside for a second. I can't say we're perfect, but I think our restaurant to me really feels like a family. We've been open a little over 2 years, and especially in the front of house, have had such a small amount of turnover.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah, and it really makes a difference, I think, in the overall tone of the space.
So let's talk about what that conversation looks like, because I talk to a lot of chefs, restaurant owners, front of house people who they know that they want to start really talking with their staffs in this particular way and really acknowledging them. I mean, they appreciate them and everything, but even more as humans, and acknowledging the stresses in the industry in a real and palpable way, because there are so many suicides, overdoses, stressors of all different kinds. And they say, like, okay, but we haven't talked about this before. How do we start?
Yeah, I think well, first off, we just don't really have like a drinking or drug culture. Like, I don't go out with my staff after work, and I'll buy people a round of beers if we have like a really challenging night and they just do a great job, or we have a guest chef in and we want to take a moment to sort of say cheers. But like, it's not something we do or encourage or participate in, really. But I think, I think just realizing that you have to get outside of your comfort zone, because you are responsible for some extent for these people's livelihoods. It's not comfortable to get up at a staff lineup and say, "Hey, did you hear about what happened last night?" And it feels, to bring it up like that in some ways can feel almost like mandatory, or like you're not doing enough. But I think it, like, just, you have to get past yourself and your own discomfort and just bring attention to it, so they feel comfortable if they need the help.
I think we as a culture aren't great with awkwardness.
Yeah.
And and chefs are in the back of the house for a reason,
Right.
a lot of the time, because people don't, they don't necessarily want to go and, they obviously love what they do, but they don't necessarily want to go and interact with the diners. And so many people that I've found gravitate to the kitchen because, like, maybe they weren't suited to something else. They maybe weren't brought up with a vocabulary for talking about their feelings. It's because you're valued for in a completely different way in the kitchens, and having to coax those conversations can be a really difficult thing. I mean, I always just say, I think, because I struggle with my own mental health and think about how people have approached me, and it's just like, hey, how are you doing? Kind of thing sometimes, or just a gift that a friend sort of gave to me was the language of, no need to respond.
Right.
I'm here if you need that.
Right. And I think too, something I think about you sometimes is, I'm 35. I see a therapist, and I think acknowledging that in front of your 23 and 24-year-old staff members is important. It's like, this stuff shouldn't be so taboo to talk about it. And like, I don't necessarily go because I struggle with X, Y, and Z. I go to just have like somebody who I can check in with, who knows the baseline, so that if I do start to feel really uncomfortable about something, or I have a significant life event, that there's someone there to turn to that's not my mom or my business partner. And so just to say those things openly, even though I feel really healthy and good, to normalize it a little bit.
Yes.
Like, step away from normalizing drinking and normalize mental health is like...
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I remember there was an old show. It's old even when I was young, called My Three Sons, and somebody on the show made it was like Fred McMurray said something about needing to see a psychiatrist. I didn't know what the word meant, and I went in and said to my mother, like, "Hey, what's a psychiatrist?" And she froze and said, "Don't ever tell anybody that mommy sees a psychiatrist." I'm like, what? Like, I don't even know what that means. Like, 'cause, I didn't know what it was. And to go from that to like, Saying like, oh, I'm going to be off talking to my shrink for a minute, or,
Right.
is a really huge thing. But even that happened to me at work once. I said I was leaving to go to therapy, and my boss kind of froze up, and I was like, what the hell, man?
Yeah.
It's important.
I know. I'll occasionally walk into a team meeting, and looking like I've been crying, and I'm like, oh, don't worry, I was just in therapy. I'm fine. I'm totally fine.
I know. I crack a lot of jokes about it too, but I still think it's important to really bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so great. Like, yay, therapy. I'm always I am so pro therapy. I also realize that it's an incredibly difficult hurdle for people who don't necessarily have the money or the access to it, or maybe come from a culture where it's taboo to do these things. And how do you, what do you say if somebody comes to you and says like, hey, I think I do need help? How do you get them to that point?
I don't know that it's happened to us in that context, but I think, because of the events of the last couple of years, some organizations are doing a really good job of bringing attention to the resources that do exist if you don't have, let's say, funds or proximity or what have you, different helplines or even now there's like online resources.
Oh, crisis text line, which I always shout out. You can text 741-741 day or night, and there's somebody there who's a trained volunteer who will text back with you and have this conversation, and it's free.
Right. And I think, too, I think people, this is interesting. Our chef de cuisine at Stone Barns, who's back in Israel now, was really wonderful. But one of the things he always said to us was like, if somebody, this is very much in a cooking context, but he said always like, if somebody comes to you and they're saying, hey man, I'm not going to be set up on time, can you help me with this? Even if you're in the weeds, like stop what you're doing and help them do it, because it will just like clear the air, stop them from spinning, and then like hopefully everybody gets the service set up. And I think as a manager, owner, it's like a completely different context. Whereas if an employee comes to you and says, hey, I really need to talk, do you have 30 minutes? Or can you meet me at a coffee shop down the street because I really need to talk about this? Just taking the time to be present for them, I think, goes a long way.
It really does. Having somebody who gives a crap and is not going to punish you.
Right.
I mean, and that's actually it. That's a tone you set from the top to let them know from the get-go that it is safe to do this with you, and they don't have to worry about that. I mean, I always say like that showing your vulnerability is actually a really huge strength. So
right, and also to mention that like I'm certainly not perfect, and we all make mistakes. We work in a very high intensity environment where sometimes we do yell, and sometimes we do lose our cool or start to cry or whatever. And I think if you know that you've crossed a line, to then take the time to process it and just make an apology about it.
Apologies, sincere apologies go so far.
Right.
It's an art that, I think we're getting more and more in tune with as, public conversations about things, come through, whether it's, Me Too, whether it's missteps in the restaurant industry. And like, there's a lot to be said for just stepping up and saying, I screwed up, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I guess we're all taught as kids to say like, sorry,
Yeah.
but not always to mean it.
Right.
I mean, it seems like you do tremendous caretaking for the people around you, for your team, and you're doing this tremendous physical thing. I am so gobsmacked by this thing that you're doing with the chef's cycle thing. Can you talk about this? How you got started in it, exactly what it is, and where the money goes to, what the training looks like?
Yeah, well, like I said, I've always been kind of into endurance athletics. I was a runner for a long time. I started cycling in part because I was still in New York and started riding a bike to get around the city. And then so when I moved back to Nashville, I did some triathlons but cycling gravitated towards it more and more because I'm so used to standing on my feet for 14 hours a day. Like, it's not the most appealing thing in the world to go for a 10-mile run anymore.
Your poor knees.
Right, exactly. So I had seen Chef Cycle and been interested in it and thought about doing it 2 years ago, but it sort of coincided with our restaurant opening. So last year signed up. Basically, it is a 300-mile bike ride. You do 3 consecutive 100-mile rides in and around Santa Rosa, California, with 250 other industry folks. They're industry adjacent. So it's not just chefs. There's people from Williams-Sonoma, people from Open Table.
Editor-in-chief of Food and Wine, Hunter Lewis,
Food and Wine Magazine.
our wonderful food editor, Mary Frances Heck.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I know Bon Appetit has had a team before. So it's a lot of really food adjacent people who are concerned about hunger issues in the United States. And so Chef Cycle raises money for No Kid Hungry, which is part of Share Our Strength. And they raise money to bring awareness to policy change around providing breakfast and lunch for kids in schools, providing education for families about feeding your family, resources. And so it is a national organization, and Chef Cycle brings in all these people taps into the chef community to raise money up until the ride, and then we all ride together. And it's such a great thing. I think tapping into the chef community, first of all, is so smart. So it's such a enthusiastic.
Oh yeah, well, and there's also a sort of a tie that I see increasingly. It's chefs who have embraced sobriety still have that sort of need to do something. And I've seen so many chefs sort of quit drugs and alcohol and become obsessive cyclists.
Yes, and just passionate activists. And so I think chefs are we all have our own venue. We all have our own platform to fundraise. So good on Share Our Strength for getting on that early, because now, it's a group of people who can say, hey, let me partner with you and we'll have a dinner at my restaurant and we'll take those funds and we'll give them to this cause. So for this year, I am riding with Team Food and Wine with Hunter and Mary Frances and some other chefs, Brady Williams, who's a Best New Chef as well last year. So we've had Brady to the restaurant to cook. We've had Josh Habiger. We've had Kate Williams from Detroit. And we're also doing some wellness-based activities too. So we did a yoga class. We have a cycling class coming up and an outdoor ride for more community-based. So it's really fun. It's a really great opportunity to engage. The training is intense. The fundraising is intense. But it's a great cause and it's a lot of fun.
I can't help you with the training, but she was saying before this happened that the fundraising, it's awkward asking people for money, so I'm gonna do it for you. So if, say, someone wanted to contribute to your particular ride, where would they go to do that?
You can go to chefcycle.org and then you can search all of the people riding. So you can type in my name or Hunter's name and go straight to our personal fundraising page and donate there. And anything that you give to someone on the Team Food and Wine will go to our collective fundraising, which I think our overall goal is to hit 60,000. We're about halfway there.
Whoa. Yeah. And then that is incredible. And then in total, this whole ride raises, it's got to be
over 2 million every year. Yeah.
That is magnificent. And shout out to Billy Shore, who is behind Share Our Strength and all these different initiatives. They also do No Kid Hungry. Right. It's actually really great. I order from Seamless more than I should. I do cook, but I order from Seamless a lot. And there's this great thing where you can round up your donation, and it's been for No Kids Hungry or it's been for James Beard's, awesome. Women in leadership kind of things. And it's just a very passive way to give your money over for this. Great. How do you find the time to train for this?
It's tough, especially in winter. That's the one thing about the May ride is you're sort of overwintering, which is hard. I do a lot of spin classes, which they actually don't recommend, but it's so hard to get out on a bike when it's less than 50 degrees outside. I think really just setting aside the time in the morning to devote even an hour to yourself to the training is really all it takes. I mean, you have to, as you approach the race, you really have to block out some time to do these, 4-hour rides, which you really have to do to make sure you're not only physically there, but mentally there, because it's a lot of hours on the bike. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a commitment. You you certainly falter, but the nice thing is you have about 6 months leading up to it. So even if you fall behind at times or you have a lot of travel here and there, like you can usually have time to make up for it.
What do you listen to while you're doing this?
I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to NPR. I have like my most listened to songs of 2018 on Spotify, which is like everything from like Despacito to, Florence and the Machine's kind of terrible. But it's, I mean, there's a lot of hours you have to fill.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And that's kind of wonderful though, to be able to be doing this incredible physical thing and filling your mind at the same time and have all this money go toward a tremendous cause.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun.
Wow. And then you also get to commune with your peers in a really intense and amazing level. So this ride takes place, you said 300-mile rides. Are those consecutive days?
Consecutive days. So we're based out of the same hotel in Santa Rosa, and we do one ride through wine country. We do one ride over to the coast where we sort of race past Hog Island oysters really fast. And then, so everything's in that area. And this year it is May 14th through 16th. And just boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, I'll make sure that we get this podcast up beforehand because I want Team Food and Wine to kick so much financial ass on this thing. So, I've talked to Hunter some about it, and I know what he is putting into it, and Mary Frances as well. And I just, I think it's an incredible thing. Chefs are the most generous souls, I have to say.
Well, I think that's a lot of, being like the title of your show. It's like we're all around this table. It's all about nurturing. That's the kind of background we come from. So I think giving and sharing, we try to do as much as we can, generally speaking.
And what is the meal that you all eat at the end of this? Is there a ritual kind of thing?
Well, they have a post-race celebration, but I've actually been emailing this week with our team about we're going to make a big reservation at the Charter Oak, Katiana Hong's restaurant.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and have like a big dinner.
Oh, I've heard such amazing things about that place.
It's incredible, yeah.
Oh my gosh, and you feed nutrients into yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even? These are just questions from a person who has never ridden a bike more than a very long time. Those nights between like the first night and the second night and the second night and the third night, what is that even like? How tired are you when you get to bed?
You're tired, yeah. I mean, the 100 miles a day, it takes people like Seamus Mullen like 4 hours. Let's be honest, he's a machine. But it takes me, I think, depending on the terrain each day, maybe between 5 and 8. And so. So the great thing about No Get Hungry, the people administering the race, is they have it on lockdown. Like every 20 miles, there's an aid station, there's snacks, there's peanut butter and bananas. So you're replenishing those calories throughout the whole ride, hydrating constantly, and then you get back to the hotel and they have they have people there doing massages, there's a pool, there's dinner, and then everybody's really like turned in by 8 o'clock because you're right back up at, taking off at 6 a.m. the next morning.
Oh my gosh. I am so grateful that you're doing this.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I don't know if you say you listen to a lot of podcasts. You listen to Jonathan Van Ness's podcast.
I haven't yet, no.
Oh, so worth your time.
Okay.
And there is a thing that he does, because I got in the wrap it up signal from our producer, but he asks, he said it's like yoga class at the end where they sort of ask like, what do you wish we'd done that we haven't done? Is there something, a topic that you want to talk about that we haven't covered, or a message that you want to put out there?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I think just keeping in the vein of I think, one thing, I've mentioned the dinner and Chef Benno a lot, but something that came up with Best New Chefs last year was the idea of mentorship.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think some of us feel very lucky to have those people that we look up to, and he's one of them for me. Mm-hmm. He is a very professional guy and taught me a lot about professionalism, taught me the importance of a healthy staff meal, but then also just about food. And I think that as professionals, it's really important for us to, another reason it's really just important to be open to our staff and accessible to our staff is that, it's true, it might be about mental health or X, Y, and Z, but also just professionalism and leadership in our industry, and it's booming. But if we don't have the people to matriculate and be the next generation of best new chefs, then like it's not gonna sustain itself. So
I am so excited about this class that's coming up, and it becomes a family, the sort of family of best new chefs that I was looking through the roster recently and thinking, look at all this talent who we have to tap. So we ask a lot of you, I think, with this, but hopefully we're going to be able to give it to the next generation with that.
Absolutely.
So I have a question. There's a speed round after this, but there's a question that I ask. So the Oprah moment, because she talks about using the secret, and I believe in saying out to the universe a thing that you want, because you are doing so much for the up and coming people, for the people around you, and for your consumers, and all of this. What is something you want for yourself?
Ooh, I mean, I truly believe I'm like a very powerful professional manifester, and part of that might just be a lot of hard work. But I really do think like that balance, like not just figuring out it's work. The way I'm working is working for me right now, but when I look 10 to 15 years down the road, like having a life that is a little more balanced and is a little bit more manageable, that is something I really want, and I'm really working on figuring out what that looks like.
Yeah. Universe, if you can help Julia with this, figure out what that thing looks like.
Yeah.
So the questions. What is the last meal that you had that made you emotional?
Oh gosh, just last night, I took my sous chef and my cook Irene, who's Mexican, to Cosme.
Ooh.
And it was fantastic. It's Irene's first time in New York, and obviously she has a lot in common with Daniela and Isabel over at Cosme. So it was emotional because the food was really wonderful, but also just to like share that dinner with her was so great.
Oh, that's such a lovely thing.
Yeah.
What's your comfort food?
Oh, sugar. I have such a bad.
Is there a particular format? Is like ice cream or candy?
Our pastry chef, Caitlin, she is just constantly putting something out, and usually it's cake.
Oh, cake. What is your dream cake?
Oh, she makes like anything with cream cheese frosting, carrot cake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I kind of want that right this second. What is the last meal that somebody made for you at their home?
Oh, the man I am seeing made me some really delicious Thai curry.
Ooh, that's lovely.
He's not a chef.
Okay. I mean, that's the thing is like people are always like, nobody cooks for me. So I'm really glad that somebody cooked for you.
Yes.
That's an amazing thing. Like shout out for that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Who is and this is actually might be a challenging question for you because of where you live. Who is the living musician who you would most want to cook for, and what would you cook for them?
I mean, Dolly. Like
you're not the only person who has said Dolly.
Right.
I think you might be the third person.
Well, we cook for musicians all the time.
That's what I'm
true.
thinking.
Like we recently did an event with Little Big Town. Casey Musgraves had been in our restaurant twice in the last week.
I've just started listening to Casey Musgraves. I'm in so much love.
Yeah, I mean that is Nashville, right?
Yeah.
But you rarely catch a glimpse of Dolly or Reba or any of the greats, and so when you do, like that's something that's really special.
What would you make for Dolly?
Oh gosh, anything she wanted. Presumably Southern food, but who knows?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can't even imagine. I saw her in concert once, and it was one of the most magical nights of my life.
Yeah.
And okay, let's say you have 5 uninterrupted minutes for self-care. What do you do?
Ooh, like in reality?
Or what? Yeah, like what is your thing? Or you can even say like, what is the thing you wish you could do for 5 minutes?
I usually foam roll. Do you know about foam rolling?
Okay, talk to me about this because my colleague is so into that these days.
Okay, so it's a form of self massage, and you just get this foam cylinder that you can. Really easy techniques for rolling out your calves and the backs of your legs, and even your IT band that just like when you stand on your feet all day kind of releases you in a way that feels so amazing, and you can do it in a short amount of time. It is super painful when you start.
Oh yeah.
But the more you do it, the more you get used to it. It's like the most soothing thing.
5 minutes of foam rolling.
Yeah. Yeah,
that is good.
great.
It is, and I hope you get to do that after your amazing ride, after we have raised you so much money, and you have raised that for the kids. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. Thank you to our guest today, Julia Sullivan. And people can find you on social.
At Julia Keelan, Keelin.
Oh,
and,
lovely.
And at Henrietta_Red.
Okay, please visit Henrietta Red next time you're in Nashville picking up a show. Thank you to our producers, Jennifer Martinick, Alicia Cabral, and Amy Frank. Thanks to Douglas Wagner for our delightful theme song. If you like what you heard, please tell a friend, write a review, or rate us. If there is something you would like for us to talk about or a guest you'd like to hear from, please let us know. You can find me on Twitter at @KittenWithAWhip. Find out more about the show and catch up on all the episodes at foodandwine.com and Food and Wine's YouTube page. Thank you for listening, and take good care of yourself until the next time.